Introspective, huh? Well, it's what I want to do today. I want to think a little about thoughts and thinking and that whole process. All right, well, it's Tuesday morning, a little bit after 10, actually a little bit after 11 out here. I'm drinking some coffee in my pastor mug. Stacy keeps finding in different places, she'll find coffee that is from different sources and things, and so I am doing really well, I really like trying out different kinds of coffee all the time, but I have a few standards that I enjoy a lot, and so some medium roasts just stay at my house, and I have a few dark roasts that I like keeping. So last week I talked about Storyville coffee. That's more of a medium roast that I'm using, and so I want to think about thoughts today a bit. It's been now almost a month ago that I talked about devious thoughts and how sometimes we have the different areas of our thought lives that will take us places. And so I was on Sunday afternoon, after the baptisms and everything, the boys have been wanting to go in the mountains. This is like when it snows in the winter, they're waiting until it's summertime to go into the mountains. So we finally, on Sunday, I said, well, let's go in the mountains. Now, I wasn't just feeling all chipper about going in the mountains because I was kind of tired, but I really like going to the mountains. And so we went to the mountains. Let's see if I have these images here of us going. Here we go. We went up in the mountains, and we went up along Bear Creek, and we managed to see, wrong direction. Here we go. Bear Creek, and there we are by the water. It was so much water that the boys couldn't really throw rocks in the water, which is disappointing for them. And so they were looking. I took a few pictures of this backlit grass. I love the way the light is backlit. And what's amazing to me too is that I really like when I'm able to go like hiking or something, and I like the idea of taking the camera along and having my camera with me and taking beautiful pictures. But like on Sunday afternoon, I was too tired. I didn't want to lug a camera everywhere, so I just took my phone with me. And so all the pictures that I'm showing you here are just pictures of me with the camera, with the phone. So here we went on this trail. We found this beautiful little trail to go hike on. It was about a mile long, and I was a little bit concerned about the boys, but I was more concerned about me because I didn't want to carry the boys if they got tired. So we went on a hike. Here is this little guy, William. He's asking if he can have a piggyback ride because he's tired of walking, and so I gave him a piggyback ride for quite a while. We climbed up on this little rock jut out here, and we looked around, and then we got some selfies of the whole family in the mountains, and we're hiking. So that was awesome. We got to hike together. It was a good, fun afternoon for us to be up at. It was called Lair of the Bear Park. I took a few selfies, more pictures of the trail. Everyone's hiking. It was a good day. So off we went on our hike, and yes, that one of those boys right here, he is barefoot. He got his shoes very, very wet, and so he ended up not being able to use his shoes. And I thought I was going to have to carry him the whole time, but he was a real trooper, and I did not have to carry him, so I was grateful for that. All right, so talking about, let's see if I can get my image back there we go. So, still not quite the right size here. There we go. That's better, I think. We'll see. So Hudson, when we were out there hiking, every 5 minutes or so, he was stopping and telling his mama or me or whoever would listen. He'd be looking at a flower or off at the view or the sunset or the hike, and he would just say something along the line, "Isn't it really awesome that we get to be out here in God's creation and be hiking? Isn't this just really awesome?" And yes, it was really awesome that we could be out there hiking. I don't know why he was so... I guess he was starved for some mountain hiking. So we need to get a little more hiking in for that boy, because we couldn't... He kept looking around going, "Isn't it just really awesome that we are here and that we're hiking?" And yes, it was. It was really awesome that we were here and we were hiking. So I'm grateful that I get to go hiking with my boys. I am hoping that as the summer goes on, we will do more of that, and he will have less... he won't have to wait so long for this really awesome bit of having the awesomeness of being on a hike with him. So that's a little bit of the trail. I was being reminded while we were out there multiple times. I just had to be reminded. Stacy helped me, and I was being reminded myself of, like, it was such a beautiful setting. It was such a beautiful thing. We were there with our family. It was awesome. And I could have been there thinking, why... And I did a little bit. I was like, why am I here? Why am I so tired? Why is all this happening right now? And you know, it's been a couple weeks since I've had COVID, and I feel way better. And most days I just don't have the stamina if I really get going. Like even when I was preaching on Sunday, I started really feeling it, and I had my breathing and other things. Now, I was never put on oxygen. I had the little pulse ox, and I would always test myself, and really my body was doing fine, but occasionally my respiration system wouldn't feel fine, and I'd be like really working to bring in oxygen. But when I would put the thing on my finger to see how I was doing great. So I was glad for that I wasn't truly suffering. I was just a little breathless. But it can still happen if I work too much, talk too much, so I have to be a little careful. But it was amazing to me how easily I, as a 41-year-old man, could sit in the parking lot or at the picnic table or be along the park, and I was not as easily delighted as my sons were by the very same things. And so as we're looking at this, I'm looking at it going, well, yeah, that is beautiful. Yes, I should be really happy that I'm here. And yes, it is awesome. I'm here with my boys. And yes, God's creation is awesome. So I should rejoice. I should choose to rejoice. But this process, when I talked about devious thoughts, I had talked about specifically talking things like the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life, the immoral thoughts that are easy to have. I had talked about fearfulness and how we can listen to the wrong voices and we have fear instead of love and the sound mind. I talked about the desire to control and how our thinking can really be messed up, where we can have the deviousness of trying to control. And what's interesting about that is, I mentioned world control in that talk, and it's not that all of us aspire to want to be in charge of the whole world. However, we get to the point where we realize that every part of the world that we bump into, we really want to be in charge of that part of the world. And so it's necessary for us to recognize these different areas. And there's probably other areas that people struggle with for thoughts and for thinking. And it's possible. So I want to be aware of the different ways we think, but I also know how I think. And so I don't want to entirely assume that everyone else is thinking exactly the way I'm thinking. However, this was a quote that I got from, I think Sam Burkholder shared it on Facebook. And so I was looking, and I went looking for it, and it's from a book that Charles Spurgeon had. And it's a series, he calls it the second series of lectures to my students. And so this was the phrase that Sam Burkholder had posted on his social media. It said, "Some ministers need to be told that they are of the same species as their hearers." And I really resonate with that, having come from a place where, not as a minister, but just as the fact that I had grown up Amish, and the fact I always felt a little bit like I was special clay, and that I somehow had things together better than other people. and then to come to that point of realizing that I needed Jesus just as much as anyone else out there. And the specific example that I've often used, because it's where God was really speaking to me, was like I was at Walmart and looking around at all the people that are at Walmart, and there's all kinds of people at Walmart, and I'm looking at each of them and realizing that God is saying, Joseph, you need me just as much as that person. And I'm like, really? Like, I need Jesus as much as all these other specimens here in Walmart? And God was saying, well, yeah, you are a human. You are not made of special clay. You need me just as much. And it's a message that I often have to have. And so this idea from Spurgeon that the ministers need to be told that they are the same species as their hearers, I think sometimes it goes both ways. I think sometimes the listeners and this can happen especially in a culture like American church culture, where we really want a superstar for a pastor. We really want a superstar, somebody who's big and perfect and flawless and can just really deliver and do amazing things. That's what we want. And so we forget that pastors and ministers are all in the same human condition as everyone else. There's not a special class. And so he continues in his quote. He says, "It is a remarkable fact, but we may as well state it, that bishops, canons, archdeacons, prebendaries, rural deans, rectors, vicars, and even archbishops are only men after all. And God has not railed off a holy corner of the earth to serve as a chancel for them, to abide therein by themselves." And so he uses these terminologies that, depending where you're coming from, what denomination you're from, you won't recognize all of the names that he gives. But he's basically saying all the leaders in the church, they're not special people off over there. But we are all same people. And there's really a necessary, there's a necessary sense in which people in the church and pastors all need to understand this, because there are some people in churches who are expecting their pastor to be perfect, and so every time the pastor is not perfect, they will come up and be like, today you really dropped the ball, you weren't perfect. And the reality is no pastor is ever perfect, and so we make mistakes. As humans, we make mistakes. And so for me as a pastor, it's good for me to remember that I'm not somehow special over here, and it's good for the people that are around me to not think that I'm somehow special over there. And so when we're talking about thoughts and the temptations that happen in our minds, it is necessary and good and right for us to realize that none of us is exempt. We might have different kinds of temptations. We might end up having a cleaner sin than our neighbor does. Like, we might see someone and say, wow, the things that man is tempted by and what he's thinking about, that is really bad wickedness. And then we look at our own life and we're like, well, I kind of have a clean sort of wickedness over here. It's not as bad. My thoughts are not as bad as those. And so I say that because when I was talking about the devious thoughts, I brought in the scripture from Matthew chapter 12, where Jesus says, let me just read it here. "When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and finds none. And then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. And then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation." And so there's this idea of the unclean spirit, and I think this is important for us to think about, because one of the questions, or one of the things I discussed in Devious Thoughts, was how sometimes we're going along in life and everything seems fairly normal, and it just seems that someone chunks in a hand grenade into our brains and it just blows up in there, and suddenly we have all these thoughts and things that we don't think are ours, or we don't think are good, we don't like them necessarily, but they're there. And we're left with a decision, what do we do with these thoughts? Now, what can happen, because of the way our brain works, what can happen is we can become very familiar and very comfortable with some of these thoughts. And so every time, whether it's the world, the flesh, or the devil throwing in this thought, saying, hey, we should think about this again, we're like, oh, that is a very comfortable way of thinking. And so we go down the path. And so whether it's fear, thinking it is necessary and good for me to think of how bad things could be and how bad all this could happen, and what will happen if all this, and we start going down and we start thinking somehow this is necessary and good for me to be fearful and to be thinking about how bad things could be because somehow this is going to help, and it becomes comfortable. It becomes very comfortable. And so it becomes uncomfortable if someone comes along and says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. You're sinning by being fearful. And we're like, no, I'm not sinning by being fearful. I have to be fearful. Someone has to be fearful. If I'm not fearful, then who's going to be afraid of this stuff? And who's going to be thinking about this? And who's, and someone has to think about it. And we go down these paths where we become very comfortable. Or, maybe there's a sin. And this is especially true for the areas of lust, where an immoral thought is thrown in, and we're like, the very first time it comes, we're kind of shocked. Like, what am I doing thinking this thought? You kind of check over your shoulders, like, is anyone aware? And then you realize, no, nobody knows what's happening in here. I can just have this thought by myself, and nobody actually knows how I'm thinking or what I'm doing. And so we start being comfortable with the fact that we can put on our little shield here, and we can think whatever we want in here, and nobody else knows. And so the problem with this is that we get to the point where we feel like every time a thought gets thrown at us, we think we have to think it. We have to host it. We have to allow it to sit in here and percolate for a while. And the reality is, we don't. Jesus said, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Out of the treasure, that was actually Proverbs, Jesus said that out of the treasure of the heart, whatever the heart is full of, out of that, the mouth speaks. And so we have this variety of different concepts that our thoughts are really controlling. And then we have this concept that we find in the New Testament where we're going to give answer one day for every thought, every word, every action. And we think, wait a minute, am I going to have to give answer for my thoughts? And so the thought process that we have, we can feel very captive by it, very captivated. And I know myself, when I've been in times of depression, there are certain thought paths that are very familiar to me. And they're very down, and they're very discouraging, but they're comfortable in that I know where they go. And so I go down this thought, well, what if this would happen? What if that would happen? What if this person rejects me? What if that person rejects me? What if all of this falls apart? What if that falls apart? And I go down, 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 down. And pretty soon I'm in a very familiar wallow, and I'm just going down there, and I'm feeling bad. And as I'm feeling bad, this is the crazy thing. As I'm feeling bad, it's as if my brain releases some kind of chemical, which is true. This is what happens in our thought process. So I have this chemical being released that makes it to where when I feel bad, I feel good, right? I feel addicted to feeling bad. And so now, what in the world am I going to do? Because now every time I feel bad enough, then I will feel a little bit of some chemical reaction, and I'll feel better. And so I can become addicted to feeling really bad. I can become, this is especially true when it comes to lust and things like porn, is that the sort of, not just adrenaline, but all of the things that the brain secretes and releases as we think about these things. These are powerful binding forces that God put in us, the Creator put in us, to bond us to our spouse. And so we're supposed to be thinking these thoughts and having these ideas and having these experiences with our spouse in person within marriage. And so that's what's supposed to be happening. But then when we have these thoughts outside of marriage, away from a spouse, away from commitment, away from where God wants us to be, and then the brain is still going, whoa, and lighting up with some of these concepts and things, and we can become very addicted to those thoughts. And so we think, I want to feel good again, I need to go think that thought. And our brain will go running down. So either our brain we go looking for some images on the computer or some whatever, we start looking for porn, or we start looking for the thought and the fantasy. And so for myself, I was never addicted to the actual pictures of the porn or the videos or the computer, but I had a lot of fantasy issues that I had to deal with. And so I've come to understand that God creates us so that we are rewarded by certain behaviors. And a bad habit is when we have gotten into a trap where we are allowing something wrong and something bad to reward us. And so our brain is being rewarded with something bad. Whereas a good habit is something good and wholesome will also reward us. Now, sometimes it's not quite as addictive, but long term it's way more beautiful. So when I was out there hiking the other day and I was looking at my boys and I was thinking about them hiking along these trails, thinking about the years to come, thinking about all the trails we're going to hike, and I'm just thinking about my son William looking up at me. He wants to be picked up. Hudson is talking about how beautiful God's creation is. Peter and Eric are enjoying the path, trying to find ways to hide and scare their little brothers, which is not working, but they're having fun doing it. And so there's lots of laughter, there's lots of conversation, we're having a good time. And that togetherness as a family is beautiful. It is not in the moment as addicting as some of the other things that we can become addicted to, or some of the other thoughts. And so it's possible for you, for me, to be in the middle of our beautiful family, whether it's out hiking, at picnic, at home in our house, around their table, in the evening, in the living room, outside. It's possible that we're right there in the middle of one of the most beautiful things that God has created, the family, or even just friendship. If you've ever been with other people and you're with other people and you're seeing the light in their eyes and you're hearing their words and you're laughing together, that's beautiful. That is absolutely phenomenally wonderful. That's what we want. But it's possible to be in the middle of that and to be taken captive and addicted to one of the other thought processes. And so we become victimized by thoughts. So for instance, being out on that trail, I could be racking myself in pain and be trying to force everyone to walk in the right order, because this is something that I would have done in the past, where I'm like, I need to walk in front because I'm the leader, and then the next person needs to be here, and I need you to walk like this, and don't come off the path, and don't do that, don't say that. And I could spend the whole time trying to control my entire little family and just ruin things for them, because I want to be in control and I want to make sure we do this right, and there's only one correct way to hike, and you need to do this, and don't go off the trail, don't do that. And after a while I could ruin an entire hiking experience for us. And so I don't want to do that. I don't want to be so wrapped up trying to control my family's experiences that we don't have a good time. So I want them to be free to be able to hike. I want them to have good rules. I want them to have a buddy system where there are always at least two of them together, so that in case of encounters with wild animals and things, that they're not completely helpless. So there are things that I want, and so Stacy and I talk about those things. But then I don't want to spend every moment of my time with friends or family trying to manipulate or control and make the conversation only go one way or whatever, because it can happen. And that's the control element, where my thoughts think that I have to be in charge, and I get some kind of little boost from that. I don't want that boost. I don't want to be addicted to control. I don't want to be a controlling person. That's not what I want to be. I want to be able to enjoy the beauty of what God has put there. And so I think of that. I think of the other ways, like I could be in a group of people and all I could think about would be some lustful thought. And I would be so busy trying to figure out how to fantasize about this that I wouldn't even be present to hear what people are saying, what people are laughing about, what people are enjoying, what people are sharing from their hearts, what they've been encouraged by God. I could be so busy. And see, this is an important thing, is that this is becoming we as humans will think, well, if I achieve this or if I do that, I won't have this problem anymore. So for instance, a young man might say, well, when I get married, then I'm not going to have any problems with my thoughts. Or someone says, if I'm ordained, then I'll have the victory over these thoughts. Going back to our quote from Spurgeon, the reality is we are all the same species. We're all the same humanity. We need God. And so when I'm thinking about thoughts and taking thoughts captive, as we're told to do in Scripture, this isn't just something that is for one class of Christians. Well, y'all need to take your thoughts captive because y'all have wicked thoughts. No, we all have fallen short of the glory of God. We all have this issue. And so we all really need to have our thoughts be taken captive, to be transformed. At church right now, I'm preaching through Romans, and I'm coming up to Romans 12, where it talks about renewing our mind and being transformed. And so as we're doing that, I have been thinking a lot about myself and where I am, and like, you know, the concern I had that I shared about last week about how when I was sick, I become cranky and snarky, and I don't like the kind of person I am when I'm not feeling well. And so I want to be sanctified in that area. I want my thoughts to be kind. I want my words to be kind when I'm not feeling well. I have all of these areas that these are all places and things that I want to be doing well. And so I have a perfect training ground. I have a family that is busy every day doing all kinds of stuff. Even now, you can probably hear them in the next room. I'm not sure what they're doing, but there's some boys over there, and they're playing, and they're doing something. And so hopefully hopefully they won't get in trouble with their mama for making a mess when they shouldn't. But they're busy all the time, and they're really good boys. They do a lot of work, they do a lot of play, they're doing their schoolwork these days, and I love watching them interact and learning how to interact with each other. But I could ruin it all in so many ways, and all of it could start right here with my thought life. And so I have been thinking about this, the unclean spirit returns. Because sometimes we feel very victimized by our thoughts. So the thought comes in, we're like, well, I can't help it. It's just what happens. That's not, it's not my fault that I think those things. And we can say that. We can say it that way. But I think about this unclean spirit. He leaves. He's gone. When he comes back and he peeps into the house is cleaned and swept and put in order. And so he goes and gets 7 spirits worse than themselves, and the end of that man is worse than the first. And so I think of it this way. It is possible for me to look at the sins that happen in my thought life and say, it's not as bad as so-and-so. That person over there has more sin in their thought life than I do. So I'm just going to kind of clean it up a bit. I'm going to try to stop and not think these thoughts. And I don't realize that it doesn't really matter if it's a little bad thought or a big bad thought. It needs to be taken captive, and it needs to be replaced. I need to be filled with the Holy Spirit of God, with the thought of I need His transformation in my life. I need the miracle of God coming in and filling me with Himself. Whether it's just a little bad thought or a whole bunch of really big bad thoughts, I've got to have God helping me with this. And so it's possible for me, because my thoughts and my sins are not as bad, it's possible for me to excuse it and to just try to control it and push it down and keep my mind clear, right? It's possible. And I might actually have some success. The problem is that God isn't calling us to walk around with empty minds, with no thoughts. He's not calling us to just have a clean house, an empty, clean, and put in order house. He's asking us that we would be full of Him, and that we could be filled with Him all the way. And so that's the challenge that I have for myself, is to not excuse whatever thoughts I have in my life. So as I'm thinking about thoughts, as I said, that's the title of this talk, that's what I'm thinking about, is that I need to take every thought captive, and I need to allow God to have His way in every area. And it doesn't matter whether I'm a pastor or a lay person, we're all in this battle together, and we all need to have our minds transformed. We all need it. So let's be honest about it. Let's talk about it, because that's a huge step. For me, it's been a huge thing, just to be able to talk to others openly, honestly, and say, here's something I've struggled with. And then to be able to openly confess our sins to one another in this area of our thoughts. And whether it's fear, whether it's lust, whether it's control issues, whether it's some pride issues, whatever the thing is that is taking our thoughts and keeping us busy thinking that we have it together, that needs to be dealt with. And we need to surrender and submit to Jesus Christ, so that when the Spirit comes back after wandering around for many days and peeps into the soul, He finds us not just swept and clean, but He finds us occupied. We are occupied by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And by the power of His Spirit, we are full of something different and something new. Not enough to be empty. We want to be full of Jesus. And then we want to be transparent and honest, and allow God and our friends and our family to be part of the journey that we're on as we're going to take every thought captive and to transform things. So that's part of the practical side of it. Is I understand that it's necessary for me to be open and honest, so I have to find a good, safe place, and that's what the church is supposed to be, a safe place for us within the fellowship to be able to share what's going on in our hearts, to be able to pray together, to be able to encourage one another. And then I want to walk this out. I want to have a transformed mind. And I'm so grateful for so many testimonies of times in the past where I've submitted myself to God, where God himself has been filling me and cleansing me, and I see, and some life event will happen, and I'll look at it and go, there's no way that Joseph Graber could have done that. But God is able, and he did it. And so I want to always be that channel that's available to him, so I can be full of him. So those are some of my thoughts on thinking, or my thinking about thoughts. Is just, let's not think of ourselves as victims of our thoughts, but let's understand that in the power of Christ, we can take thoughts captive, and we can change our thinking habits. We can change how we think. We can change what we think about. We can, all of this is possible. We just have to do it. So if you've been thinking that you or your pastor or someone is made out of special clay, stop that thinking and just get your feet on solid ground, back in the good clean earth, and just interact with other people as if they're other people, and encourage one another in Christ. And let's be aware that our thinking matters, and that not every thought that shows up in our brain should stay there. Some of them need to be wrapped up and cast out and replaced by God and his word. And Psalm 1 is a beautiful place to start to talk about being where my thinking is not informed by the world, but it's informed by the law of God, meditating on him day and night. So those are my thoughts this week, thinking about thoughts about thinking, whatever it was, thinking about thoughts. Hopefully somewhere in there you'll find some encouragement, and I personally am feeling a lot better this week. Still not perfect, but a lot better. I'm really looking forward. We're doing some gardening and planting, and I'm working on our RV, getting it ready for our trip that's coming up next month. So I'm just really looking forward to this summer. It's going to be an awesome time. I have a camping trip planned with the boys. It's going to be a great time, but I want to make sure that I don't ever allow myself to play the victim and think it's just happening what's happening. I want to always be on guard and to always be aware that God has something, the King of Kings has something he wants me to be thinking about, and by his power I can. I don't have to be victimized by my own thoughts. Blessings. See you next time.